So in this day and age, you expect to be able to spin up a service quickly and easily without fuss, it being cloud native with sensible defaults, having an excellent developer experience. Well, of course you can do it with Quarkus. I'm Saeed, the Codogrammer, and that's exactly what we're going to do in this video. We're going to get Quarkus up and running quickly and easily, hopefully, and connect it to a Postgres database and just see what that experience is like. So I'm a big believer in, if you want to get to know a piece of software, the best thing to do is to get it up and running quickly and start playing with it rather than endlessly talking about what it is. But I will just say a few brief things about Quarkus before we dive in. So the quite bombastic short strapline is supersonic subatomic Java. The slightly longer strapline is a Kubernetes native Java stack tailored to OpenJDK Hotspot and GraalVM, crafted from the best of breed Java libraries and standards. So that's the quite grand promise of Quarkus. And in this video, we're going to get it up and running and have a little play. We're not going to do a deep dive of all of Quarkus's features. By the way, if you don't want to be the last to know about all the industry latest news and developments and tech tutorials, make sure you hit subscribe. All right, so back to Quarkus. What exactly is it? Well, essentially, it's an open source framework that's targeted to the cloud. So expect sensible cloud defaults. It's designed to get you up and running quickly. In many ways, it's a collection of libraries with some nice glue and utilities in between. And you may have heard of or used some of those libraries outside of Quarkus. It's not too far off Spring Boot, but Spring has a lot of tentacles and components. So if you are starting out, Quarkus might actually be a lot simpler to get your head around. It's not too far off Micronaut, an analogous framework, and there's a bunch of other frameworks which I won't bother comparing it to. But by making this video, I'm not suggesting that one framework is better than the other. It's just another tool in a developer's arsenal to use to develop applications. And one more quick definition before we jump into it. If I use the word extension with regards to Quarkus, that's just a term that Quarkus use, but you can think of it as a dependency with some defaults. So for example, if we include the Postgres extension, just think of it as like including Postgres, some tests for support, and some sensible defaults. Okay, it's that kind of thing. In Quarkus, they use the more abstract term of extension. All right, so the first thing is, how do we create a Quarkus project? So if you want to create a Quarkus project, there are four main approaches. You can use your IDE project creation wizard. IntelliJ, for example, has one. We won't go through that in this video because that's pretty easy to do, and most people are reasonably familiar with their IDE. We can use the Quarkus CLI, which is a command line interface tool that Quarkus provides to get up and running quickly. We can use the code.quarkus.io website, which is kind of a project creation website, very much like start.spring.io for Spring Boot projects. And you can, of course, just manually configure your project. However, I recommend using one of the other approaches, since you'll often start with some sensible config based on the extensions or dependencies that you want to use for your project, and you'll get up and running a lot quicker with a lot less faff to set things up. All right, so first up, we're going to have a look at an example of project creation using the CLI. So if you go to the Get Started Quarkus page, and I'll add the links to the description below, you can see that there's instructions here on how to install the Quarkus CLI. Now, I already have it installed and I'm running Mac OS, but there's instructions here for Windows as well. So I installed it using these commands and it was very simple and easy to do. There's also instructions here for installing it with SDK-man. And if you're not familiar with SDK-man, I've got another video which talks about how to use SDK-man, mainly to install Java, but really it can be used to install a bunch of utilities. Okay, and there's some instructions on how to get started. So I've already installed the CLI. So let's just jump to my terminal and get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a directory, okay, to place our new project. Now I already have these commands typed out, so I'm just going to paste them into my IDE. Okay, so we're going to now go into that directory, and in order to create the project, I'm going to run this command. Now, this is invoking the Quarkus CLI, so I'll just show you what that looks like, just so you can see that it does actually exist. So if I type that, you can see that it comes up with a bunch of options. So I've just typed in the name of the command, but actually it says if you want to create a project, you can use Quarkus create, Quarkus dev, Quarkus build, etc., etc. Okay, and we'll discuss what some of those things mean a little bit later, but let's go back up to our command. All right, so let's just paste our command, which is to create the project, which is Quarkus create, and then we move into that Quarkus project code with Quarkus. Okay, so let's try that. Looking promising. Okay, so that's it. We won't bother going through all of this output, but essentially it's created. You can see the word success and the green tick. And if I just do an ls there, you can see that there's some stuff in there. It's Maven, and this is kind of a starter project to get you up and running quickly. Now, in order to start this, all you have to do, and start this in dev mode, I'll talk about what that means a little bit later. But in order to start this in dev mode, you just type Quarkus dev. And again, this is invoking the CLI, and it's based on the project that you're currently in. So we're inside that code folder. So let's start that. And you can see that it's pulling down all the dependencies that it needs. All right, as you can see, it wasn't able to run because it's saying that port 8080 is already in use. So what I'm going to do is just Control C out of this, and I'm going to kill something that I have already running on that port. Just give me 2 seconds. All right, so I had another application running on that port. So we're just going to try it again and see if it behaves any better. All right, that looks much better. Now, if you want to run a test using this CLI, you can literally just type the letter R and it's executing the tests in that application. If you want to toggle the test output, you can do that as well. And if you want help for more options, you can do that as well. Okay, so it's super powerful to use the CLI. Now let's just go and prove that the application is actually running. Let's go back to Safari. Let's open a new tab. And I've got it bookmarked here. So if I just click on that, you can see that it says, congratulations, you have made a Quarkus application. And there's an index page there, which we could click on, but we can also click on hello, which is the first REST endpoint. All right, so hopefully you can see how quick and easy it was with just a couple of commands to create a project and get it up and running in dev mode using the CLI. We're going to stop this and clean up just so that we can create our actual project using code.quarkus.io, which is, I think, even more beginner friendly. So to stop the service, I'm just going to type Control C. I'll come out of this directory and then just paste this command in order to delete that directory. All right, so we're back in a browser. Let's just close a couple of these windows and go to code.quarkus.io, and we can dismiss this little window. All right, so this is a really nice UI which you can use to create your projects. Remember, I said it's very similar to start.spring.io, which is for Spring Boot applications. All right, so let's go ahead and set some of these values. So we'll click on more options and just change that to Codogrammer, and we'll call this CG for Codogrammer and DB because we want to connect to a database. We can leave most of these other things as yes. We'll change that to Gradle. I have a slight preference for Gradle over Maven. Let me know in the comments below which one you prefer. All right, and now let's go through some of these. Now, the ones with starter code should, in theory, be available by default, and we've got starter code set to yes. That just means some code to get you up and running to begin with. Now, if you look here, you've got absolute tons of things. You've got all sorts of REST easy components. You've got Eclipse, Vertex, you've got reactive clients, you've got Undertow, WebSockets, Hibernate. We're going to use Hibernate ORM with Panache. We're going to use JDBC driver Postgres. Now, one thing that's quite important is if you want to follow along with this tutorial, it's quite important to select just the ones that I'm selecting. If you select some other ones, it may be that when it's building your project, it doesn't know which flavor. Like, for example, if you selected multiple JDBC drivers, it might not know which one to configure, and you might get some different starter code, which might be fine, but it might make it difficult to follow along with this tutorial. So keep an eye on the ones. I'm selecting Hibernate ORM with Panache. I'm not selecting Hibernate ORM. I'm selecting JDBC driver Postgres. Okay, and just go back up to the top. REST Easy is already included. Yeah, I think we're good. All right, so looking through here, you can see that you have an absolute ton of extensions to choose from. Now, just as an example, let's click on this down arrow on one of these. You can see that here you can copy the CLI command to add this extension later. Once you download your project and then later on you realize that you're missing some client, you wanted to include Quarkus REST Client Jackson, you can literally copy this command, run this inside the project folder, run this command inside the project folder, and it will add this extension to your project. You can copy the Gradle command, which does the same thing. It's very analogous to the CLI, but it's using your Gradle. You can copy this snippet, which you can just paste into your build file. You've got lots of options here. Okay, it's very, very useful. And in some of the cases, you can also see a link to the actual extension. I can't find any examples here, but let's go to Postgres. All right, and let's just drop that down. You can see that there's a link to the extension guide. So you can see how flexible this really is. So let's go ahead and generate our application. It's giving us some information here on how to get started, but we already know that. So let's just say download the zip. Yeah. Okay, that should be generated. So let's close that. Okay, so I've now opened that project inside IntelliJ, and you can see all the bits on the left, and you can see this help page here. So let's just have a quick look at some of the artifacts inside here. We'll ignore the Docker one for the moment and click on here. We can see my entity, Panache entity. So looking at the code, we've got an entity file here, and I see that it didn't include the REST easy stuff. So I'm just going to quickly look at the build.gradle file. I was expecting that to come in by default. Let's just generate this project again. So let's close this and close that and go back here and just go to the top and select REST easy reactive JSON. And I think that's probably enough. So let's just say generate the application again. Okay, and we download the zip. Okay, I've reopened that project in IntelliJ now. Let's just have a look if we get anything different. So we go to main, Java. Yeah, so now you can see a greetings resource. That's an indication that it's included the REST easy stuff. I think I've got Haskell set up here. So I'm just going to go to project structure and change that to, say, Java 18. It's running in Java 17, but that should be okay. And now we have an entity. So if you look here, this talks about how to work with entities using Hibernate with Panache. And we've got a greeting resource which generates a path. So first things first, let's build the project, okay, and see if that works. So we'll say Gradle W clean build. Looking good. Yep, and that works. So this is an example of why you might want to use one of these starter approaches like using code.quarkus.io, because it sets up a bunch of sensible defaults. So if you look in here, you would have needed this property, and it even has got some beginning code here in the comments to get you started, and it's created an entity. So before we go any further, there is one prerequisite, and that's because we selected Postgres. If we want to use this in dev mode, we need to have Docker installed. Now I've got Docker installed on my local machine. There may be other databases and extensions where you don't need Docker installed because it can just spin it up in memory. But for Postgres, you need to have Docker installed if you want to use dev mode. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. And what is dev mode? Well, dev mode is a special feature of Quarkus. It's part of the excellent developer experience. You can do things like live reload with automatic compilation. So if you make changes, you just refresh in your browser and it automatically picks those up, which really speeds up development and makes it a lot more fun. Obviously, dev mode is for development only and not for production. It goes without saying. And another cool feature is that you have a dev UI, which I'll show you as well. So it's very cool. And there's more information at this page here, which talks about the differences between development mode and production mode. All right, so coming back to the IDE, let's get this up and running in dev mode. So we can say, okay, I'm just going to make this a bit smaller. Okay, and the browser here. And I've already got the application URL bookmarked. So this is the application URL, which is just localhost 8080. And if we just scroll down, it's got some information here and some links. And given the extensions that we've used, it's also got some links to the guides. So first of all, let's click on hello. And it says hello from REST Easy Reactive. You can see that that's coming from this greeting resource. So let's just change that to something like that, just for the sake of it, and see if we can get this live reload to work. And there you go. Without doing any kind of stop and start or anything like that, it's automatically immediately available. And that's coming from a Java resource, not some kind of HTML resource. Now, the application we're going to create is just going to be a simple form, which allows us to add an employee to our Postgres database. So in order to see how that's going to work, let's see if we can first of all find out how to get access to our Postgres that's come as part of this Quarkus setup. So if we go over to the services tab, and it's already connected to Docker, and we can list the containers, we should hopefully see one that looks like Postgres. So if we click on this one here, just see what that is. Yeah, that's our Postgres startup. If we go to the dashboard, we can see that the port is 53236. So we'll go to database. Okay, and we can probably leave that as it is. The username and password by default is Quarkus and Quarkus. Okay, and I think the rest of it can stay the same. So apply, say okay. We should have done a test connection. We didn't do that, but I think it can connect. So if you click on, let's just open public. Yeah, you can't see anything there. So if you click on one of three, you can select Quarkus. Let's see if that, we'll just say all databases and let's see what that does. So we go into Quarkus, database objects. All right, so now you can see all the databases. So let's just go back to our resource and add another endpoint. Let's call this one something like add employee. Okay, and then let's give this a path something like this. Okay, so we want to add employee with a name and a role. Let's just call this something like employee, yeah. And we'll get this and just change it to added employee. That should be 2 E's. Okay, and now this is not production code. This is just for us to mess about with. Now, if we go back to our entity, we've got this thing here called my entity. Let's just refactor that by typing Control T, and let's change that to employee. Okay, and this is the thing that we want to save to the database. So we've got field, we'll change that to name. Let's duplicate that and change that to role. So you've got name and role, that's your entity, and they're both public. That's part of what you need to do for Panache. So let's close that. Okay, so what we want is, and I'm just going to copy the code because I've written it already, is to just paste something like that in there. So we create an employee and we need to declare the path parameters. Paste those in there. Okay, so we've got two path parameters. I'll just make that a bit easy to read. Okay, so now we've got name and role, which come from here, name and role. When we submit a form to this endpoint, or just use a REST request for this endpoint with name and role, it should submit and to save this in the database. So let's just organize imports. Now, I already created a HTML page using ChatGPT because I'm lazy, and that's really what it's good for. And I'm just going to paste that in here under resources. Okay, so I'm just going to copy that from another location. Okay, so we'll paste that in there. That looks good. Let's just go in there. And so just for a second, I'll just expand that out. So you can see this is a bunch of HTML. I didn't write all this stuff. I'm not a front-end developer. I'm just going to change that to employee. Spell employee, add employee. We'll just check that that matches this. Employee, add employee, name, role. Yeah, that looks good. So now, in theory, because we're using Quarkus, we shouldn't need to restart anything. We should just be able to live reload. So let's go back to our browser and see if we can go to this page, which I've already got saved. So I'll click on that. So yeah, this is our form. And let's try submitting something. So we'll set that to Rob. We'll say Rob is a manager. We will click here, okay, and that's done something, hopefully. Come back to our IDE. I'm just gonna non-maximize that. Okay, and let's pop open the database and have a look. So if we look at Quarkus, and say refresh, 0 of 3, and we can select public. Okay, let's have a look in there. So you can see tables and you can see my entity, and you can also see employee. So if we double click on that one, there's nothing in there. Okay, let's just refresh that. Okay, there's nothing in there, name and role. So let's go back to greeting resource and see if we submit it to this. So we'll just put some console logging here. Okay, and go back to here. Say Joe is a manager. Click me. Let's just check our terminal window, see if we got any output. Oh, we get an error. What's this all about? Ah, transaction. So we need to add a @transactional here. Forgot to do that. Okay, and let's see if it works now. So in fact, because this form has already been filled in and it produces a get request. Yeah, let's just try that again. So we go to add employee and we say Tom is in sales. Add, go back to our IDE, see if it looks any better. Yeah, it does. Okay, and now let's check the database. And you can see that Tom from sales is there. So let's try another one. Customer services, and let's try that. And refresh. And you can see that Bob from customer services is there. Okay, so that's the bulk of our application. Now, hopefully you could see how quick and easy it was to get up and running with Quarkus. We could actually connect to a database without any of the hassle of downloading these Docker containers separately or installing Postgres. We could just get it up and running and wired together super easily. We can see the containers and the database from within our IDE, which again makes it so much easier. One more quick thing I wanted to show you that you also get with Quarkus is that when you have your application running in dev mode, you also get app dev UI. This is the URL for that. Okay, and here you can see all sorts of information about your project. You can see the build step. You can access a config editor. You literally have a bunch of stuff you can see about your project. So it's kind of like a dashboard for your project. You can see your entities and all that kind of stuff. So it's really designed to make development quick and easy and quite fun. Now, my conclusions after playing with Quarkus are that Quarkus is an awesome tool. For me, the main killer feature is the developer experience and getting up and running quickly. If you have production constraints, and also the cloud native aspect of it would make a big difference. Then it's the use case, which is for cloud native. So many apps are overwhelmingly going into the cloud. So this just provides you with a great starting point. Finally, it's not necessarily a better tool. It's just another tool in your arsenal. I'd love to know in the comments below whether you've used Quarkus or plan to use it. And are there any other cool Quarkus features that I didn't mention in this video? Thank you for watching.